Okay, we're on Kovav Amud Aleph 106a towards the bottom. We're continuing our story with Balaam and Balak. And now we come to the end of Balaam's life. The line begins with the word Lamos, and then it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines from the bottom of the page. The line begins with the word Lamos, and in the middle of the page, middle of the line, there's a small ayin inside a half parenthesis, indicating a new verse, and that is the verse there, Vayakam. No, sorry.
That's continuation.
I'm sorry. The next line down.
With the
next line down with the pay.
Yeah.
The 4 lines up from the page, 4th word.
Yeah.
Okay. So the Gemara says like this. The Gemara now is getting to the end of Balaam's life. Of course, this is after the Moabites take Balaam's plan to allure the Jews, which results in the plague that kills 24,000, and then Pinchas takes his revenge, and eventually ends in battle where the Jews overpower the Midianites. That's the storyline, and this is the verse describing that final battle. It says like this: "Ves Malchayo Midian, and the kings of Midian, not just the kings, but also like the kingdoms. Hargo Achaleim, the Jews killed them at the edge of their sword." It's a terminology. There's Bilam Bambar. Achaleim means like to their wasted. Sorry?
They killed him. I think one view was like Chaleim. It actually Bilam kind of fell on the sword and was in the sky, and they put him down. So
that's not the term here. That's not the way the Gemara is explaining it here. Anyway, so they destroyed the kingdoms of Midian. There's Bilam Bambar, and Bilam son of Bar, the sorcerer who began this whole thing, who gave the whole plot. Harag b'charav, they killed with the sword. This is what the verse says. So the Gemara asks, Bilam, my boy Hassam, what was Bilam doing there?
He's not a Midianite.
He's not a Midianite, and the verse told us early, the Gemara told us from the verse earlier that Bilam went home. Right? He went home, and as parting words, he gave Balak advice on how to allure the Jew by putting this whole elaborate seduction process. So why did Bilam come back to the war? Why was he back here? He should have been home, peacefully enjoying whatever it is.
Where is Bilam from?
From Moav.
Well, Bilam is now from from like Lavan in Syria, because we say Lavan and
Balaam Bar Hakeni. No, it's a Kenite, right? It's Keni.
Keni is
Yisrael is a Keni.
So Bilam was from Lavan's family, or that's in the Syria, from the Ryan.
Anyway, he's certainly not a Midianite. The question is, what's he doing there? He was just hired by the Midianites to curse, and then he gave this advice to seduce the Jews. So what's he doing there? Why did he come back?
He's a mercenary. Exactly.
Sorcerer for hire.
Mm-hmm.
So the Gemara says like this: Rabbi Yochanan says, "Shahalach, he came back little schar to get reward. Esim v'arba elef shipim Yisrael for 24,000 that he caused of the Jews to die. In other words, he got paid for his original cursing, his original prophecy, which ended up failing. And then when he left, he gave Balak advice on how to seduce the Jews, which later led to the death of 24,000 Jews. And then when he saw that his advice was successful, he came back collecting payment. That's why he's there. But instead, he came during a wartime and died at the hands of the Jews. Right? In other words, when he heard that his advice was successful, he came back to collect. So, Amar Mar Zutra Bar Tovia. This is what Mar Zutra said, the name of Tovia. Amar Rav, and the name of Rav. Hainu da Amri Inchi. This is the meaning of the colloquial saying. Gamla Azla Lamaboy Karna. Camels came to acquire horns. Adoimne Dahava, the ears that it had, the Havali that it had, Gazin Mine have now been cut off from it.
Yeah, it wants to have horns like
that's right. The camel is jealous of other animals that don't have horn, that have horns. So it decides it wants to go get horns. But instead of getting horns, it ends up losing its own ears. That's the colloquial saying, apparently.
So they have an English expression not widely used. It's called, he came to get even, but he got even worse.
He came to get even, but he got even worse. Yeah, I guess. It's a similar idea. He came to get his payment, but ended up dying in the process. I just wonder if there's I'm sure there's something deeper here. The symbolism of the camel, Bilam being compared to a camel, and the Midianites being compared to some animal with horns, and then Balaam losing ears, right? I think that was the only part of his body that was functioning. We said he was half lame, half blind. Now he's losing his ears also. I don't know, I wonder if there's some symbolism here. I'm sure there is, but this is what the Gemara says. He arrived to get paid, and instead he dies, and this is compared to the colloquial saying, the camel wants horns, and instead loses his ears. Not only doesn't gain, but loses. That's the Gemara. Okay, so in this very same verse, or the next verse actually, not the same verse, but much later. In Yeshua, I guess it's describing the story that once was, it says that they killed, as Bilam ben Ba'ar, that the Jews killed Bilam, son of Ba'ar. HaKoisim, the Koisim is like a sorcerer, but it's like a magician, implying it's a negative spin on sorcery, as opposed to, let's say, Navi, prophet. In other words, a prophet would get direct communication from Hashem. Here's how you should speak. A Koisim, a sorcerer, would manipulate negative spiritual forces to get some information out of it. That's the difference between a Navi versus a Koisim.
Would these be like the Egyptian ones?
Yeah, similar.
Confronted Moshe?
They were called Khartoumim, but I suppose it's similar. I'm sure maybe there's some subtle difference between the Khartoumim and a Koisim, but that's a similar, in the same genre. So the Gemara asks, Koisim? Why is the verse referring to him as a Koisim? As this sorcerer? Navihu, he was a prophet. That's the way the verse described it in the Torah. And here, later on, when it recounts the story, it describes him as a Koisim, as a sorcerer. Why calling him a prophet now? Rabbi Yochanan says, I just thought of something, but Petchila Navi, he started out as a prophet, and at the end, Koisim, he became a sorcerer. Maybe this is the meaning of losing his ears. He wasn't able to hear the messages of Hashem anymore. I don't know. Because he's no longer a prophet. Now he has to use sorcery to get information. Somehow, for some reason, I guess, in trying to defy Hashem, or maybe because of giving
That's
this...
what he says, he lost it.
Yeah, he lost his prophecy because he tried to
curse the Jews.
He tried to defy Hashem's things. He lost his prophecy, and instead he had to rely on sorcery. But the Gemara gives a different colloquial saying for this one. Amar Papa says, last line on the page, Hainu Amri Inchi, this is the meaning of the colloquial saying, which is, Misagni Veshilti Have, she is a descendant of rulers and noblemen, and Eisen the Gavri Nagri, but she sells herself to carpenters. In other words, she comes from royalty, and then she's selling herself out to simpletons. So here is Bilam, prophet, and selling himself out to the Midianites, to the Midianites, right? He basically allowed himself to get paid to do it instead of saying, "Look, I'm a transmitter of Hashem. You can't pay me or buy me to do anything." He took the money and tried to sell himself out, and as a result, lost his prophecy.
These are people who work on boats.
Not carpenters. Yeah, well, actually, the second version is carpenters. Yeah. So either people who work on boats or carpenters. Either way, on the lower level of the social hierarchy, rather than the noble people she comes from. Okay. So says the Gemara like this. Now the Gemara further analyzes the death of Bilam. Hargu b'nei Yisrael b'charev al chalalehem. We quoted the verse earlier, which said that the Jewish people killed the Midianites at the sword on their wastedness, like.
Or some chalal means also on their dead. Chalal is like.
Yeah, chalal is waste. Chalal means like wasted. Sometimes it's used. Like when you lay waste to people, they call it chalaleim.
So chalak also means like this people who died.
Who are already dead.
Yeah.
So Amar Rabbi says, but the point that the Gemara is pointing out here, as Rashi tells us, is that the word chalaleim is in the plural. Many deaths, as opposed to chalal, which is in the singular. So Amar Rav says like this: why in the plural? Shekaimu, but because they fulfilled in him, in this one individual, Bilam, Arba Misais, all 4 deaths that exist in the Jewish capital punishment, namely skila, sreifa, hereg, v'chenek, stoning, burning, death by the sword, and then hanging or strangulation. So they did all 4 of those to Bilam. How they managed that in the physical? So Rashi says, they hung him, then they lit him on fire from below, then they decapitated him, and then his head rolled off into the fire below. So the hanging is the chelek, is the strangulation. Decapitation, that's the sword. When he falls down, that's the stoning. 'Cause that's how the process of stoning was. They would first throw the person off the cliff, so they died in impact. And then when his head fell into the fire, that would be the burning. So they had this clever way of incorporating all four deaths into Balaam. Now, obviously, the four types of capital punishment are 4 types of punishment / 4 types of kapara, 4 types of atonement. So I guess they figured Balaam deserves all 4. So they gave him all 4. But nonetheless, it didn't help him getting their share in the world to come. As the Gemara tells us, he's one of the 4 people who don't get the share in the world to come. That's why he's on the list here. Right? Okay, now comes an interesting story. And this gets back to something we talked about earlier. We were talking about Balaam being around when Pare asked for advice. This Gemara seems to undermine that, at least in its literal sense. Gemara says like this. There was a certain heretic who told Rabbi Chanina, Mishamalach Bilam, have you heard about Bilam, Bar Kamahava, how old he was? Like, how long did he live? Amar Le, so Rabbi Chanina said to this heretic, Michtav leksiv, written, it's not written. So I don't see it in any verse. Ella, but I can infer it from a different verse. Midiksiv, considering that the verse says in Tehillim, Anshe Dama Mumirma, men of blood and deceit, La Yachzu Mayim, don't make it through halfway through their lives. People of men and deceit don't make it through half their lives. And this is Bilam, who was both deceitful and ended up being responsible for the death of 24,000 Jews. So they won't make it through half their lives. Now, if that's the case, we have to figure out what the Torah expects is the average life of man. And we have the verse which says, you may shonim behem, I can't remember the full verse, but people's lives are on average 70 years, and if they are strong, 80 years. That's the verse. So half of 70 would be 35. So therefore he must be less than 35. And thus, because the verse says those of men, blood and deceit won't make it to halfway through their lives. So he has to be at least under 35. And therefore Rabbi Chanina concluded, either he was 32 or either 33 or 34. Amarle, said the heretic says to Rabbi Chanina, Shaper Kadmas, very well, you said. I once saw Pinkas, a document, like a document, some sort. The Bilam, I found the document describing the history of Bilam. And in this document it was written, Bilam was 23 years old. Bilam was 33 years old. Bilam the lame was 33 years old. Katli, when he was killed, Yasi Pinchas Listoy, by Pinchas the highwayman, or Listoy actually means like the bandit. I guess this is a document from the Bilam side of the story, and therefore they refer to Pinchas as a bandit man. You know, this guy jumps out killing people. From our version of the story, it's the reverse, but that's their version.
It's a different Pinchas, right?
This is the same Pinchas.
That's the same Pinchas.
Yeah, but when you were looking at a text from the supporters of Bilam, they would describe Pinchas as the enemy. Right?
He wasn't the actual killer, but
He was.
He was the actual killer. It seems like he was actually. He killed Zimri, and then maybe he was the actual one that killed Bilam.
Yeah, but did it by Kishuv. I mean, not Kishuv. He had to overcome the Kishuv of Bilam by the same Mephorish.
The Gemara said earlier that they killed him with 4 deaths, right? They hanged him with a burning and the decapitation.
Maybe as leader, he's attributed to his death as leader,
as opposed to the fact that he actually did the deed. I don't remember.
No, Rashi brings it to Medrash that he actually killed him. Yeah.
That he was actually the one that did it.
Yeah.
It's the old story.
What happened was that Bilam used the kind of Kishuv to fly, and then the Pinchas did the same before us to bring him down. And that's what Rashi brings here on the.
But Rashi over here actually.
In the Rashi Chumash.
Actually, Rashi in the Gemara seems to imply something you were saying.
It's like a bounty hunter.
31:6.
Actually, you're right. Actually, look. Look at. But you're right, actually, Rob, because in the Rashi in the Gemara says like this: Sar Tzava, Pinchas was the master of the army, the general. Even if somebody else actually did the killing, the entire battle is attributed to him. So you're right. At least in Rashi in this Gemara here, you seem to be right. He didn't actually do the actual deed, but it was still him, because he led the people. Now it's interesting. This is an interesting part of the story that I find when I read it, it hit me. which is the Gemara introduces this fellow as a heretic, right? There was this heretic. Now this heretic had a document which validated the story of the biblical story, and yet he still was a heretic. Interesting. This heretic didn't not believe in the Torah.
No, he accepts Torah, like a church person.
That's the minimum. Makes sense. The scripture versus rather than
scripture, but nothing is accepting the oral law. I remember arguing with these people.
That's interesting.
In a nice way, I said, try to bring their proofs. Yoshka said, okay, that's in the text. What the oral law? We don't accept the oral law. Okay,
so maybe that's what it is.
Like
the point.
My hands are tied. Gemara's in the Midrash is very nice. We don't believe it.
I hadn't considered that. I was thinking of just a complete heretic, and then he's seeing text. But I guess
very well.
You're right. You're right.
That's what he wanted to test him. He says, he went through the text. He couldn't find anything in the text. So he says, you're right. The text, there's no answer. Yet we go on oral law. You would accept that. So that's
right. He uses a verse anyway. Good point.
I know what it's like. It's frustrating. You can bring Gemaras and Midrash. It's a big deal.
So the Gemara concludes, the truth is that this is something that Rambam used to point to when he would argue with his, when he moved to Egypt and he had to contend with the local Sadducees, which were people who believed in they were actually the dominant force in Egypt at the time until he took over.
The Karaites,
The Karaites, I'm sorry, not the Sadducees, which were a spin-off of the Sadducees. They believed in the written text, not the oral tradition, and he used to make the point that all translation is, by definition, an interpretation. If you don't live speaking in biblical Hebrew, you are left with, you must translate it into your life, unless you're anyways interpreting. So, in other words, every text requires interpretation. The difference between you and me is you have interpretation of your own, and I have interpretation that's by tradition, going back to Moshe Rabbeinu. In other words, you haven't freed yourself of your own problem. Anyway, the Gemara concludes now the story with Bilam like this, with the following statement. And then tomorrow we get to Doeg with some very interesting statements about that. So the Gemara concludes the story with Bilam as follows. Amalei mar berei de Ravina lebrei. Master, the son of Ravina, told his son, B'kulu, in all of Torah, like Topfish the Midrash, don't excessively expound homiletically on the verses in a negative way. It's not a nice thing to do. With you mentioned this earlier, that with the simple reading and halachic reading, you have to stick to specific rules. When it comes to Drush, when it comes to homiletics, there are rules, but they're much more lax. They're much more
flexible.
More flexible. That's the word I'm looking for. But so you can kind of, the broad rule is, as long as the message you are deriving is a positive message, you pretty much have free reign, as long as you're not expecting halachic action. Then you have to follow certain very specific rules. So because of this flexibility, one can expound and expound and expound. So says Master Barei de Ravina to his son, don't excessively engage in homiletic interpretation that puts a negative light on the characters of the Torah. Chutz, Lavar, with the exception of Bilam HaRasha. For him, as much as you want. Kama the Mishkachas Bey, as much as you find negativity to spin on him, Drush Bey, go for it. So, which is an interesting thing. We've talked about this before, how a person, even when learning Torah, one should be careful not to put Jews in a negative light. And we talked about how the Rabbi used to do this specifically, finding ways to, even Jews who were long past, thousands of years ago, but finding a way to spin the stories in such a way that it puts the Jews in a positive light. And the Gemara is kind of indicating that here. When it comes to Bilam, pile it on. You have a sadistic streak, take it out on Bilam. And on the rest of the Torah characters, try to find a positive way of reading it, and don't excessively overdo the negative. God willing, tomorrow we have some statements. Sorry?
I think we could learn that just even on our personal relationships.
Even in person, that's correct.
Yeah.
Tomorrow we have comments on Doeg. He's one of the other commoners listed who don't have a share in the world to come. And we have some very pertinent and practical statements there. Wonderful day.
Here's the Rashi brings it about the flying and so on and so forth here. Kliya Kodesh, what that's it. That Rashi impressed me. Well, somebody actually made some proof. It's like a Havdil from the movies. Or the person's like flying in the air and they bring him down and he lands on top of
Like a kite.
Yeah, but then that's very interesting, but it doesn't negate that it could have been somebody else who were engaged in the actual battles.
But no, he took.
Hey, look, the word biyadoi, right? Rashi's word biyadoi b'reshusah. Where's the pasuk?
Yeah,
Pasuk
because
is.
he took the seats.
Yeah, 1 second.
Oh, the
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a midrash, but not.